We are a legacy organization that has been around working in family engagement in education for over 25 years. And we want to specifically champion public education that centers family voice because we know the power of authentic partnership and what it does when families are involved. And I know that y'all are here for a good time, not a long time. So I wanted to make sure that I anchored what this series is about, which is it's supposed to be it's a new learning series that we're launching that's centered around how we move past compliance and toward authentic partnerships. We want to be anchoring in all of the important conversations about what strong family school partnership looks like right now. We're going to be exploring different topics like trust, communication, leadership, literacy, shared responsibility, and the conditions that are actually going to move family engagement from this idea that feels abstract, even though we know it has real consequences in our day to day schools and our lives, toward effective practice. And our hope is that this series is going to give people lots of not just language, but um, again, things that change the material conditions in our schools for our kids. Just a quick notes if folks haven't seen or you haven't been oriented to the webinar space already. Before we begin, we are recording this session and we are in webinar mode. You all will be remaining off camera, but you'll have the opportunity to participate in the chat and through the Q&A if you have any questions that come up. If you need any additional tech support, we have staff members that can support you with that. Um, Feel free to practice your use of the chat by introducing yourself with your name, your role, where you're joining from. And as questions come up, we will be monitoring the Q&A portion to make sure that we can weave your questions into our conversation for today. And again, we're going to be talking about the engagement advantage study, and we're going to be like anchoring how the study was done, what was found, and what schools and systems can learn from it. And with that, I'll be passing it to our Families and Schools CEO, Yoli Flores.
Thank you, Ashley. Welcome, everyone. I am really, really excited to be part of the launch of our new webinar series called Family Engagement Reimagined. So, welcome, and we hope that this is the first and not the last time we get to see you and be in community with you, talking about all things family engagement. So, some of you who know families in schools know that we believe deeply, deeply that families and educators are powerful partners. And we know that when schools build real relationships with families, that students are more likely to feel supported, to feel seen, and to set up and being set up to succeed. What makes today's conversation especially important is that what we're going to learn will help us move beyond simply saying that family engagement matters, and it does, but it'll help us ask the stronger, more important question about what it looks like. What does effective family engagement looks like? What does it change? And what are schools actually doing when they do it well? For us, this is not about family engagement as an extra layer or a nice add on. This is about family school partnerships as part of the core work of building student success. So I'm excited for today's conversation. You'll get in a moment to meet my dear friend and colleague. It gives us an opportunity to highlight the research and practice. And you'll get a lot of insight today, we hope, through the conversation that I'll be having with our guest, Dr. Bergman. I'll have Ashley introduce him, and then we'll get going with the conversation. Can't wait. Ashley.
Thank you so much, Yoli, and excited to get into this conversation. So, what uh, what I'm gonna do without further ado, I'm gonna introduce Dr. Bergman, who's the lead author of the Engagement Initiatives, finding from a mixed method study on family and school partnerships. This study was launched by Learning Heroes, and we'll make sure that folks have access to it. If you haven't already had the opportunity to read it in the chat. And Dr. Eyal Bergman is a researcher and strategic advisor whose work focuses on strengthening the partnership between families and schools. And his research in particular examines how family engagement contributes to school improvement and student outcomes, and how leaders build systems that make partnership a sustained practice instead of just isolated efforts. He's the founder and CEO of Upwell, and his work is grounded in a deep belief that schools become stronger when they know how to listen, how to learn, and how to work alongside their student families. That perspective is shaped not only by his research and leadership, but his personal roots in community organizing and youth mentoring, and his own upbringing as a bilingual Latino in an immigrant home. Dr. Bergman also serves as a strategic advisor to Learning Heroes, and he was the principal investigator in this impact study. Again, we're going to start with how the study was designed, move into findings from phase one, pause for some audience questions, and then turn to bright spots and practice implications. And just naming that we worked out some tech while folks have been going. So hopefully people should have access to the chat and the Q&A function. Thank you so much. Yoli, I'll turn it back over to you to guide us into the conversation, and we can start again with how Dr. Bergman and his team approached the study. Thank you for joining us.
Wonderful. Hello, Eyal. I'm so excited to be in this conversation with you. For those of you who may not know, we're longtime colleagues and friends, and I have so much admiration and respect for the work that Dr. Bergman does. He helps inform us as leaders in this space with such incredible insight and passion. So I'm super excited to have this conversation and to get to be in the dialogue with you. I also have been tracking this work for a few years. I got really excited, Eyal, when the first phase of the research project began, and been waiting on pins and needles to find out like the real meat of what we now know about the key elements of family engagement that really make a difference. So before we get into what the study found, let's start with how you approached the research, both in phase one and phase two. And starting with phase one, what was the question that you were trying to answer in that first phase?
Yeah. Even before I answer the question, I just want to like acknowledge and share the admiration is really mutual. The work that Families in Schools has been doing now for 25 years, congratulations on the anniversary year, is really important. You have a really important footprint here in California, but also around the country. I used Families in Schools materials when I was a district leader in Cajon Valley years ago. Um, Yep. And so we brought in trainers to come support some staff at the school district so that we could really build up our own capacity to train families. So um, I just thank you for the kind words, and it's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, so the question really emerges if we can transplant ourselves back 6 years ago now, is when the pandemic hit. April of 2020, I was having conversations with my mentor and collaborator, Karen Mapp, also a friend of yours, a mentor and collaborator to many of us in the field, saying, gee, wouldn't this be an interesting time to study the impact of family engagement? Because the hypothesis that was emerging at that time was, shoot, everybody's going into school closures. So the schools that had stronger relationships with families in April of 2020, when the pandemic hit, were going to be better equipped to withstand the disruptions. That was the hypothesis. That's what we wanted to study. And so then Karen Mapp and I were in a webinar talking, much like you and I are talking now, saying this is a really important time to study the effect of engagement. And wouldn't you know it, a funder was on the webinar, stepped forward and said, I would be interested in knowing more about that finding too. And that's really what got us going on studying what has become known as the Family Engagement Impact Study.
And for those joining us today, Eyal, that are not researchers, can you walk us through in plain language how that phase of the study worked? What exactly did you begin to ask and to sort of dig into?
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen because
Yep.
want to walk us through it. So these are the three stages. We're going to get into stage two a little bit later, but I want to start by really grounding us in the data source
Okay.
for the study. The data source has been influential in stage one, which was the quantitative analysis, and in stage two, which is the qualitative analysis. So you've spent time in Illinois, Yoli. You know that the five essentials is, I consider at this point, pound for pound, the richest data source on family engagement that we have in this country. It is a validated tool used statewide in Illinois for over 10 years. It measures not just family engagement. It measures what is known to be the five essential conditions that are essentially the key ingredients that lead to schools improving over time. And so those five ingredients are, you can see them here on the slide, what they call the centrality of principal leadership, effective school leaders, collaborative teachers. This is where the research on PLCs comes from. Ambitious instruction, so rigorous instruction, quality materials, supportive environments for students, our students feel safe to take academic risks, and what they call involved families. We use the term, we've moved from involvement to engagement. We're going to give them a pass on this because the data is so rich, but essentially the extent to which families are involved and supportive of the school and of their kids' education. These are the five essential ingredients. So what we did was we took the involved families score. And now, before people say, oh, well, that's over there, that's Illinois, that's not us, a couple things about this data source. First of all, Illinois has the interesting distinction of being the most demographically representative state in the country. So the demographics of Illinois match onto the demographics of the country better than any other state in the country. In terms of rural, suburban.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in terms of rural, suburban, urban, in terms of racial demographics, in terms of income distribution, Illinois is the most demographically representative state in the country. And this is a teacher survey. It is not the family survey of five essentials. We can get into a whole conversation about family surveys and why schools are good or bad at capturing family data. But the point is that 80% of teachers in Illinois complete the survey. It's a very high response rate. That makes it essentially research grade data. So that is the data source that we used. And what we essentially did is that we did a statistical analysis where we looked at the family engagement score from 2019. That was the year before the pandemic hit. Had about 24 statistical controls, and then compared it to 2022 outcomes. So 2022 being the first full year that we had concrete data after the pandemic. So that's essentially how we built the analysis, comparing pre-pandemic family engagement, controlling for all the variables that we could control for, and comparing it to post-pandemic outcomes. And in layman's terms, what this essentially means is you can have 4,000 schools in Illinois, all of them in the model, and you can basically do an apples to apples comparison of two different types of schools. So like the controlling allows us to consider two schools that have the same outcomes, they have the same proportion of low-income students, the same grade level, so you're not comparing elementary to high school, the same community, so you're not comparing rural to urban schools. And that for all intents and purposes, two schools that are essentially the same, except for one school scored very poorly on their family engagement. That's the red school in the 10th percentile. And one school scored very strong. That's the blue school that scored in the 90th percentile. That's how we set it up. You want me to go into the findings?
Got it. Yeah. I want to know specifically, like, what did you learn? Because what we know is family engagement is a strategy to better student outcomes. So, did you start to look at what those outcomes were, and what did you find?
Yeah. Well, the biggest finding was on chronic absenteeism. So, everybody's chronic absenteeism rate went up in the pandemic. The schools that had strong engagement saw a considerably smaller increase in their chronic absenteeism. So that difference between 15.9 and 9.7 may not seem like a lot. That's 6.2 percentage points. But show me a school that doesn't want to lower its chronic absenteeism rate by 6.2 percentage points. And in real terms, in a school of 500 kids, that's 31 kids. My daughter goes to a school with 1,000 kids. That's 62 children. That is multiple classrooms of kids.
Right.
That is a grade level, practically, of kids that are not chronically absent just because of the strength of their family engagement. And chronic absenteeism is a big problem. I mean, the norms around school attendance have totally changed, as we know. But like with chronic absenteeism, kids feel more and more disconnected from school. For teachers, it's really hard to plan instruction. For school leaders, it's really hard to build school cultures if kids are missing a lot of school. It has a lot of really bad effects if kids are missing a lot of school. And so that's why chronic absenteeism is actually, it's a warning sign in a lot of communities. So it's not just that kids are missing school, it's that it actually has implications beyond the individual days that they're missing. And then on student attendance, which is different than chronic absenteeism, in a school of 500 kids, that's 800 individual student absences. And you and I are in California, many of the people who are here in California, average daily attendance in a school of 500 kids, that's almost $50,000 in school funding. There's real implications.
Yep. And our schools more than ever need those resources. And so if kids are not there, not only are the kids not learning, but we're not getting the funding needed to run our schools.
Yeah, right. So I think that this is really important. There have been other studies that have linked engagement interventions to improved chronic absenteeism, but we've never seen so many schools in a study that show a very clear association between a family engagement score and chronic absenteeism improvements at this scale. So it's very promising it's a good news story in this world where it's really hard to like bring down absenteeism rates. Here we have a strategy to do it. And then I want to I told you to remember that 6.2 percentage. The difference between 15.9 and 9.7 is 6.2 percentage points.
Right.
So if you see here, you go from 10th to 90th percentile, weak to strong engagement. It drives down your chronic absenteeism by 6.2 percentage points. Now, we know that schools that have high rates of poverty also have high rates of chronic absenteeism, tend to have higher rates of chronic absenteeism. But there are a lot of factors that are contributing. It's not just the poverty. You also have higher principal turnover and higher teacher turnover. And sometimes communities can feel less safe, so kids don't feel safe walking to school. So there's a lot of different factors that affect chronic absenteeism. What we wanted to see is an apples to apples comparison of the effect size of family engagement on the effect size of poverty. So we controlled for both of those factors. And what we found is that when you go from low poverty school to high poverty school, it accounts for about a 5.7 percentage point increase in chronic absenteeism. So when we go from 10th percentile poverty to 90th percentile poverty rate, that equates to about a 5.7 percentage point increase. When we go from 10th percentile family engagement to 90th percentile family engagement, it equates to about a 6.2 percentage point decrease. In other words, like it may not be that family engagement just combats the effect of poverty. It might actually outweigh poverty on chronic absenteeism. And this to me is the most important finding in the study.
That's a striking finding, right? That family engagement has a stronger relationship with chronic absenteeism than poverty. We tend to think that poverty is the cause of all, the consequences of kids not doing well in school, but that's not the case.
Nope.
You're just showing the evidence of that. What would you want school and district leaders to really understand about that, Eyal?
Well, I mean,
What's the mind shift that we're trying to, sort of encourage here?
I mean, I think that when you like walk into a lot of like break rooms in schools and you talk to a lot of teachers or you talk to school principals, a lot of folks will say things like, I love on my kids, I believe in them, but like, what am I supposed to do? Like, look at all of these things that they're having to deal with in their lives.
because of their income status.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pobrecito culture out here,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so I think what this data shows us is that like actually like there are schools that are in very high poverty communities that are crushing it on family engagement and they're seeing chronic absenteeism that is much more similar to their higher income peers.
Mm-hmm.
And so like we see the effects on like proficiency rates too. Like this is the other really important finding in the study is that like the schools, everybody's proficiency rates went down on ELA and math, but the schools with strong engagement saw smaller decreases in their proficiency rates. And that's not surprising because like the families are able to tap in and support their kids' learning. And these differences in ELA and math proficiency, you remember that wonky year, that 2020, 2021 school year where some schools were remote and some schools were in person and some schools switched to being in person and yeah,
Right.
it was all kind of crazy that year. There was a lot of talk that year and in the year since about like the value of in-person learning,
Mm-hmm.
right, over remote instruction. So we did a comparison of these findings on ELA and math proficiency on the value of in-person learning. And we found that these differences equated to about 100 in-person learning days instead of remote. So,
Wait, explain that. Explain that.
okay. So we know like if you jump back to about 2021, 2022, we had a lot of conversation in the education space about schools that were in person
Right.
more often
Mm-hmm.
experienced less learning loss, less decrease in learning. That
Mm-hmm.
remote learning really hurt kids. It was really bad for kids,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the schools that were in person more experienced like significantly fewer declines, right? So what was interesting is that in Illinois they published each school how many in-person days they were.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to do a comparison of like strength of family engagement to in-person learning on ELA and math proficiency rates. And what we found is that these differences in strong and weak equated to about 100 in-person learning days instead of remote.
Amazing. Wow.
Amazing.
That's powerful. And we're still recovering and still have quite a bit of learning loss residue, if you will. So, it feels like we're still challenged, but there are some answers here about what we can do to, you know, both mitigate but think ahead about the kinds of conditions at a school in a school environment that can help mitigate that. If there's ever a future, hopefully never again, epidemic of some sort. But there are other reasons. We just had wildfires in LA.
Yeah.
There are other reasons that impact both in person and remote learning. So did anything else surprise you from this phase of the study? Anything else, even as someone leading the study, did you say like, wow, I didn't expect that?
I did not expect the strength of engagement to have an effect size bigger than the effect of poverty.
Hmm.
That was really surprising.
Hmm.
Just because of like what we think. Like we all have these biases. We all know that schools that are in high poverty communities um, experience much higher chronic absenteeism.
Right.
But I was genuinely shocked that the strength of engagement was actually had a higher effect size. And then I
Mhm.
was honestly surprised that the effect size was so big. 6.2 percentage points is a lot.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah.
that's really a lot of effect for what we see. And I think it puts a lot of wind in our sails as family in the field of family engagement, to be honest.
Right. I'm wondering if our audience is, as you're hearing some of this, if there are questions that are coming up for you before we get into the next phase of the study. Ashley, are there any questions that we can entertain right now before we keep moving?
Yeah, I have a question that says given everything that you shared so far, how should schools think about family partnership when students are still carrying the effects of interrupted learning?
I mean, I don't know that it's that different from what we should do with every child, which is to um, teachers and staff need to build relationships with families, get to know them, and make sure that there's a transparent and honest understanding of how kids are doing academically and socially. Build really strong partnerships that leads to families and teachers being on the same team. And so, like, the teacher has their job in the classroom, the parent has their job at home, and both sides know what the other side is up to, and both sides know what the other side is doing to support the child. The child knows what the teacher's doing and what the parent is doing, so that everybody has a clear line of sight into where the child is, where the child is going, right? And I don't know that we need to, I don't know that that's really different for any child, to be honest.
We have
Maybe,
two more.
I guess the only thing I will add is that, like, if children are further behind, then it's just much more urgent. Like, we need to, like, step on the gas and make sure that, like, those conversations are happening now.
Ashley, did you say there were more questions?
Yeah, there are two more questions, and thank you so much for focusing on the trust and the relationship building. That makes a lot of sense, and that's core to a lot of our work at families and schools. Um, so we have one question from Avila that says, "Was there a conversation about the type of family engagement were some methods more engaging than others?"
Oh, we're about to get into that.
Yes.
Nice.
What
And
we've
then
been waiting for.
there's one more question from a parent, I think a parent rep that's like watching live from LAUSD school. Hey, thank you so much for the watch
Okay.
party. That we're talking about parent engagement, and sometimes that can be uh like a jargon word, but when we're talking about parent engagement, what does that actually look like in plain
Uh,
language?
That's the
uh,
phase 2 part of the study, right?
yeah, I see that there's a question about, like, the operational definition of family
Yeah,
engagement.
yeah. I wanted you to
I,
answer that one from Leticia
I'm
Lara.
using family engagement and, like, it's the five essentials parent involvement score. So I'm going to share my screen again and just be really clear about this. So when I say, like when you see here that the strength of a school's family engagement was associated with lower chronic absenteeism, what we're referring to here in weak engagement and strong engagement is their involved families score. So the involved families score is a so each school in Illinois has an involved family score. They also have an effective leader score, a collaborative teacher score, an ambitious instruction score, and a supportive environment score, because these are the five essentials of effective schooling. And so teachers actually complete a survey on each of these constructs. And so you're able, and it's publicly available information. I would love for us in California to have data that has a family engagement score for every school. So anybody who wants to join me on a public policy campaign to make that happen, I'm just putting that plug out. But we don't. But it would be nice, and Illinois has it. So that's why we went to Illinois, because it was the best data source for this. And so that's what we mean. So, like, the 90th percentile score on the involved family score is the strong engagement, and a 10th percentile score on the involved family score is the weak engagement.
Yeah, that's super good clarification. And after this first phase of the study, I remember talking to you, Eyal, saying, "Well, what exactly were these schools doing to give them these high family involvement scores?" And you kept saying to me, we got to go back into the field because now that's a more qualitative kind of study. We've got to get the funding for it. But I think that is the $64 million question. I mean, we've got 50 years of research from Dr. Karen Mapp and Henderson and many others in this space that have for 50 years been telling us the power of family engagement to move the needle on student success. Where it's sort of been mushy is like what is high impact family engagement look like? What is it that some of these schools are doing specifically that give us those great results, lower absenteeism, better outcomes in reading and math, et cetera. So that's the juicy part that we're going to get into. All right, so let's go there. So that's the next question. What were stronger schools actually doing differently? So walk us through phase two. How was it designed? How did you identify some of these bright spots? And what did those effective engagement practices look like?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with the methodology, and I hope you'll indulge me and nerd out with me on this because it actually, I think, really sets this study apart is the analytical rigor that we deployed here gives us a lot of certainty about the findings. What we did is that we started with this framework called positive deviance, which we borrow from the field of public health, which takes as its basic premise that some school, like there are an X number of schools in a given community, in a given district, and some schools are just outperforming other schools when all the other criteria are the same. They serve the same kids, they have the same per pupil expenditures, they're subject to the same like collective bargaining rules. Like everything is the same in a couple of different schools, but some schools are just way outperforming expectations. So like what is happening in that school? So that's the frame of reference that we took. So we wanted to identify what we call bright spot schools that operate in the same settings as their partner schools that basically have roughly the same size. They serve the same demographics of kids. They have the same per pupil expenditures. They're in the same district. They're the same for all intents and purposes, except for their family engagement score. And so what we did in order to understand who's outperforming expectations is that we need to know what are the expectations. So if you follow me here, the x-axis on this graph is an expected involved family score. That's the score from the 5 essentials, right? We have the score from the 5 essentials. So we put in about a dozen different variables into a model to basically say like we can roughly predict where every school is going to be because it's similar to all the other schools that are similar to it. So we're able to create an expected involved family score. That's the x-axis. And then we're able to compare it to their actual involved family score. That's the y-axis. And so every school in Illinois is on this graph. There are 4,000 gray dots on this graph. And if you are on the line, on that black line, it's because you're scoring as you would have expected. So if you go to like 50 on the x-axis and you go up, you'll see that it's right there at 50 on the y-axis. All right. So if you are below the line, you're scoring below expectations. If you're above the line, you're scoring above expectations. So if you look at this blue dot, you see the blue dot?
Way up at the top.
Way up at the top. It has an actual involved family score of 82. Now, there are gray dots above it. You see that there are gray dots above it. So there are schools that are actually scoring above it on their involved family score. But this school, you would have expected to score 40. So something special is happening at this school. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to identify schools that are way outperforming expectations. So in order to be enrolled as a bright spot school, you had to meet certain criteria in our study. The first criteria is that you had to score in the top 20 percentile of overperformance for multiple years in a row. So we only wanted those that were considerable outliers over time. And then you also needed a partner school that was scoring at the 50%, so at the line or below. That
What
means
do you mean by a partner school?
That means that like another school in your same neighborhood that just did not have the same level of family engagement. So this is what this means, right? So we ended up so in order to be enrolled as a bright spot school, you had to be crushing it. You had to have really high family engagement scores, beyond expectations, but you also needed a school in your same district, in your same neighborhood, serving the same kids that was not crushing it. And we went to pairs of bright spot and partner schools all over the state. And what we tried to do was we tried to assemble a sample of bright spot and partner schools. So you can see here that the demographics are fairly similar between bright spot and partner schools. So their demographic profiles are very similar. They match or come very close to the statewide average. And so the difference is that the bright spot schools have much higher family engagement and better outcomes than the partner schools. So that was really important. We wanted to go to both types of schools. And actually, when we were doing the interviews with bright spot and partner schools, we did not tell them whether they were a bright spot or a partner school. We just went to them and said, talk to us about your family engagement. I mean, we had a scripted protocol, right? But like, that's essentially what we did because we didn't want to tip our hand.
Right.
So what did we do? We ended up collecting over 100 interviews, one-on-one interviews with every print. So we ended up in 10 schools, 5 bright spot and 5 partner schools. We had 100 interviews with every principal and dozens of teachers and families, and all the family interviews were available in English and in Spanish. And we had our structured interview protocol, and then we analyzed all of the findings and came up with the distinguishing factors. That is, I think, the juiciest part of this study. So you want me to go into it, or should I stop for questions?
Maybe just a question about the interviews themselves. So you interviewed, did you interview principals also? Principals,
Yeah.
teachers, families?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, let's get into what were some of the major distinguishing factors that emerged.
4 distinguishing factors emerge in the differences between bright spot and partners. Some of this is new. Some of this is validating of what we have known. So there's value to both. The first is mindsets. So it's not just what you do, but what you believe about families. And I'll get into more depth into all of these. But the first is mindsets. The second is leadership. And we heard really consistent differences between how bright spots, like how teachers, principals, and parents talk about the school leader setting the tone for an effective family engagement strategy. The third is the communication patterns. And I think this has the most new information in the field and has really useful practical insights for schools, which I'll get into. And the last one is not new to anybody. It is, well, it shouldn't be new to anybody. It is the depth of the relationship, which often lasted well beyond students leaving the school. So what did this actually look like? So first on mindsets, do you mind reading some quotes for me, Yoli? Can I just put you on the spot?
Yep. It doesn't matter which one.
Read the bright spot. Read the bright spots quote first.
Okay. So, quote, the why is pretty simple. We don't achieve our mission without our families. It is as simple as that. Wow. And that's from a principal.
That's from a principal. Exactly. And I love that quote because it's just like, it's just very plain. It's just very simple. And what I love about the partner school parent quote is that it's pretty emblematic, right? School staff only reach out when my children are bad or off task. If it's a behavior issue, we work together to solve it. That's about it. How often do we hear from families? I only hear from the school when something went wrong.
That is pretty typical. Right. My kid is acting out. My kid didn't show up. That's when you get the phone call. Yep.
Right. So we understand mindsets. The second is around leadership. And what we heard at the bright spot schools, that was a consistent theme, was that leaders, they provide a vision for family engagement. And that basically means principals explaining why it's important to them. Like, if you're a teacher at a school, you've got 8 million things to worry about. And if a principal is saying, I need you to work on 8 million things, then it's very easy to get lost in the sauce. if a principal is like streamlining and making coherence for you, and one of the most important pillars for them is that you need to have a solid relationship with families, that provides a runway for teachers to have the time and the training and the support that they need to be able to engage in effective engagement work. And so that comes from providing a vision, inspiring their staff by modeling it themselves, having really clear expectations, having really clear accountability structures, like having the systems and structures in place, like using your PD time, using your staff meeting time, allocating the resources at your disposal to help teachers, especially new teachers that are scared to talk to parents, helping them get over that fear. Helping, and there's only one way through it. You gotta learn how to be in relationship with people. Then, like, if teachers aren't being trained that that's a core part of being a teacher, then that falls on the principal to start to help teachers to get there, right? And I want to show you an example of what this looks like. Over and over again, I've been presenting these slides, and this is the slide that everybody asks me for afterwards, so I'm excited to share with you. It's not from Illinois. It is from a school in Baltimore that I think is doing an exceptional job of family engagement, because what the principal has done, this is a master schedule.
Yeah,
For
tell us. It's a little bit tiny to see, so describe
it's
what this is.
yeah. So this is a master schedule. Each column is a teacher's schedule. You see the rows are the periods in the day. So I've blacked out the teachers' names, so you can't actually see the names. That's the blue bar at the top. But like you look at the furthest column on the left, like 501, that's a fifth grade teacher. That's the first fifth grade teacher. So the first period, she's got resource. The second period is advisory time / office hours with families.
Oh, wow.
This principal has put office hours with families in the master schedule. This is pretty rare, and
Mhm,
it's next level. Why? Because if the kids are not with a teacher, they've got to be with somebody.
mhm.
So you have to hire teachers. You have to use your Title I money. You have to use your community schools money. You have to use some kind of funding to hire additional certificated staff to do enrichment or other support or other academic tasks with the kids, so that the teachers can have that period to build relationships and build and have productive collaboration time with families, so that it's not pigeonholed into back to school night and parent teacher conferences, and that's it, because we don't have anything else in the bargaining agreement for family engagement. So
I don't know any school that has done this. This is really remarkable and so next level. You're right. This is Family Engagement Reimagined, the name of our webinar series. So, yeah, would love to, sort of track who else might be doing this, but I think this is an outlier. I bet you this is an outlier.
it is an outlier, but you got to give people like a sense of like where you can point your arrow. Because I know we have our principals out there that are thinking to themselves, like, where am I going to get the time? Well, you could be creative, and like any, especially secondary principals, like they will tell you, master schedule is king. Like if it's not in the master schedule, it's really hard to get people to like actually have the time to do something. So some schools, they'll do like they'll pay. There are some collective bargaining agreements that call for additional time for relationship building at the beginning or the end of the year. Some schools have flexibility in how they schedule parent-teacher conferences, so they don't just do them in like 1 or 2 days. They do them over the span of a month. Some principals use their PD time or their staff meeting time to help. They give time back to staff, or they use the collaboration time. Like there's all other different types of structures. And so the question is, like, are principals using those structures to advance comprehensive partnerships with families?
Mhm. I'm going to pause for a quick question because I think it's specific to this chart. It's
Okay.
from Lourdes, and she's asking um, how this works for families since it could be during work hours.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. So this doesn't mean that like the only time that they talk is pigeonholed into this time. What this means is that like teachers often will like have to stay after school to like plan for the next day, or they'll like but like it's during that time that they have to plan for the next day and have an IEP meeting and try to reach out to all the families. And so it's like, it's really just a way of giving some time back to teachers so they can use it to like respond to messages from families or send out communications to families or do that kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff can be done asynchronously, like you get messages from families, or they can use that time for their prep planning. And then because they know that in the afternoon, they're going to have a meeting with a parent. So they're going to use this time to like catch up on other work because they're trying to accommodate the parent in the afternoon.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's just a matter of like having, and then this principal has like a spreadsheet where the teachers track their conversations with families. And so like there's a whole mechanism behind the scenes to really be able to help teachers have the time and the supports that they need to build productive partnerships with families.
That's right.
Okay, I'm gonna
Oh,
keep going.
keep going. You got two more, right?
Yeah, and this one is really important. Communication. The two things really popped in the communication patterns, in the differences between Bright Spot and partner schools. And actually, before I go, I want to say I failed to mention when I say partner school, I don't mean bad school. It's not that Bright Spot good, partner bad. Partner schools reflect the norm. There is good family engagement happening everywhere. There are some schools that have really tough cultures and a lot of teacher and principal turnover, and yet there is still a teacher or two that is holding it down, right? And that understands the value. What a partner school, they all have parent teacher conferences, they all have back to school, and there is stuff happening at partner schools. The bright spot schools are just those that are really exceeding expectations in a consistent way.
Yep.
And one of the big ways that they're doing that is both how they are communicating with families and what they are communicating with to families. So
Okay.
how they are communicating, when we looked at the partner schools, what they tended to do in their communication patterns is a lot of like whole classroom, whole school. Like we've got the field trip, we've got back to school night, sign up for your parent teacher conference. These are the things happening in the school. The bright spot schools, they do all of that, but they also do a lot of one-on-one parent to teacher communication in planned ways, in unplanned ways, like before school, after school meetings. It popped. It was just a major difference between the bright spots and the partners. One-on-one, parent to teacher. When I do trainings, I often will ask people a kind of a provocative question like, who should be primarily responsible for family engagement in the school? And everybody, it's easy to say everybody has a responsibility for family engagement in the school. And I'm like, so do you think it should be principals? Do you think it should be teachers? Do you think it should be your community schools coordinator? Do you think it should be the family liaison, the front office staff? And it really is just meant to stimulate a conversation. But then I ask people like, who's a parent? And now put your parent hat on and now say, who do you need to talk to the most as a parent?
It's the teacher.
It's the teacher.
Yeah. That
So
parent teacher, I mean, I always say that that's the unit of change right there. That parent and that teacher. I was talking to Lisa Borrego at the California Department of Education the other day um, about this very issue. And I said, it's that combination. It's that teacher and the parent where the magic happens because that's who's in front of their children every single day.
yes. And that's what allows for the conversations to be about academics. And that's the other big finding.
Mm-hmm.
Families and teachers talked much more about the communications being about how is my baby doing in school? How is your baby performing in school? And I want to show you this quote. And I'm going to read it in Spanish because it came from a Spanish speaking mama. And we've translated it here in English. So I'll do it in Spanish and you do it in English.
Okay.
Mi hija estaba atrasada en matemática y la maestra empezó a decirme que esto es un trabajo en equipo. Me mandó libros y materiales que podíamos trabajar juntos en casa y de a poco mi hija empezó a mejorar.
All right, let me read it in English. I love it. I love your Spanish accent too. Uh, My daughter was behind in math, and then the teacher started telling me it's a team effort. She sent books and materials that we could work on together, and my daughter made better progress.
What
Yeah.
I like to say about this quote, Yoli, is this is not about a math night.
Mhm.
This is about a parent to teacher communication about math.
Mhm. Mhm.
I like to tell people I'm pro carnival, like have the carnival, have the math night. It's good for school culture. It might even be really good for improving math. If you are giving parents individualized information about how their child is doing in math, that's what moves the needle on math. Like, or you can insert any topic area. Like, if parents know how their kids are doing, then
Mhm.
and they get support from the teacher, then they can actually advance their child's learning. But we have to believe that they're capable of doing it, and we have to have a relationship first, and then we can actually have that one-on-one academically focused conversation.
Yeah.
I
My
really
our experience at Families in Schools is that parents are so hungry to know what we think maybe, well, they want to understand. They don't speak the language. They don't have much of an education. We did a series of community learning sessions around early literacy a year ago, and we walked families through the foundational pillars of early literacy, right? Vocabulary, phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, et cetera, oral language development. And 100%, almost 100% of them after every session is like, why hasn't anybody ever given us this information? Because now I know how to help my child at home.
so okay.
We just don't do that.
No, we don't. Schools are not habituated to doing that,
No,
right?
right?
That's why, the big important finding from Learning Heroes research has been that 90% of parents in America think that their kids are at grade level, which is
Mhm.
crazy,
Right.
right?
Because they're not.
Yeah, and when we've done focus groups with teachers to say, hey, why don't you share a complete and accurate picture of how kids are doing? And they tell you in their out loud voices, two main reasons. Number one, I'm worried I'm going to be blamed,
Mhm.
and I'm worried that my principal won't have my back.
Mhm.
So teachers are not equipped to have teachers, many teachers. If you are a fourth grade teacher and you've got a 9-year-old in your class that is barely able to sound out letters, like is at kindergarten or first grade level, and you've got a parent in front of you and you have to communicate to them, like your baby should be able to read and your baby is far from reading. That is a hard message to send if the school has not provided you with some training and some support to be able to deliver that message, but it has to be delivered. Parents deserve to know the truth. And parents can do a whole lot to support their kids if they know the truth.
Yeah. And more often than not, they're not going to blame the teacher. They're going to say, what can I do to help? What can
Yes,
I do at
exactly.
home? Because I think
Exactly.
our parents do trust oftentimes that the teacher's doing the best that they can with the resources that they have. Um, but they want to know how can they be a partner. And this is why we underscore the word partnership in
Yeah.
everything we do. It is that partnership between the parent and the teacher. And I think parents know that, but
Yeah.
they haven't had the opportunity to be a real partner for their kids.
Yeah. And I like this quote from the partner schools like, I do call parents frequently, but I just don't see it across the board. Besides parent coffee, having family nights, I don't see anything else. I like this quote because it's like, I'm trying,
Yeah.
you know? And you see people at partner schools that are trying, but they don't have that culture of that
Well, and they
one-on-one.
don't have what you talked about earlier is that leadership from the principal who makes it a priority, who has their back, who provides the resources to make it happen.
Yeah. Okay. And now for like the obvious section of this presentation, relationships really matter. So we hear from Bright Spot, like they talked a lot about relationships that go way deeper than day-to-day stuff. And they talked, this is something that I was surprised. A lot of teachers and parents at Bright Spot schools talked about staying in relationship well after the kids left the classroom or left the school. You want to read this quote? It's beautiful. I'm gonna give you the chance to read it. It's really lovely.
Okay. This is from a teacher.
Um,
I know it sounds silly, but we have conversations with families about their other children or about their job, taking time to connect on a deeper level, not just, hi, how are you, but how are you really? Yeah, that's a real relationship starter right there.
yeah, that's like I care about you as a human.
Yeah, right.
So
Love it.
those are the distinguishing factors. Those are the most important distinguishing factors between Bright Spot and partner schools.
Right. The relationships, the communication, the leadership, and what was the first one?
The mindsets.
The mindsets. Yes. Awesome. Amazing. And so important for the work that we do. I mean, we've been doing this work at families and schools, but this kind of research helps us improve the work we do to help schools and help educators do their work better on behalf of their kids. I have a feeling that there are also some barriers that were confronted here as you did the study. How did stronger schools respond to the barriers that are in front of them?
Yeah, there's barriers everywhere. You can see them here. These are the barriers that are mentioned more often: language access, cultural differences, time and work conflicts, educator interest, educator capacity. These are the common barriers that we see. So, like, this validates what we've seen in other places. What was really interesting, Yoli, is that so when we had over 100 interviews, which means we had over 1,000 pages of transcripts. So that was a lot of coding, and I'm happy to
No
answer
wonder
like,
it took this long to get us this
well,
juicy information.
yeah, it's a rigorous study. It takes a minute.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
um, we basically, like, when you develop a qualitative code book, you basically like identify the themes and then you tag the themes all throughout the transcripts, and then you're able to count them. And one of the things that we just saw is that the partner schools just talked about the barriers way more than the bright spot schools did. They just mentioned them more often. It's not that the bright spot schools didn't mention barriers, but when they did, they did not treat them as insurmountable. So what we saw was like basically barriers, but like something else that comes after it. So like I love this quote from a principal who says, "Are there barriers or just excuses? Language is the number one barrier, but I try to speak the language and parents seem to appreciate it." I love that quote because it just kind of drives home the message. It's like, yeah, we're out here trying. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's getting in the way, but like, we just got to keep it moving.
Yep, yep. And there's no excuses, you know.
Yeah.
Well, we have to keep doing the work, and it's those four things. Um, all right, so there are barriers. Bright spot schools don't talk about them as much. They don't want excuses. They're just doing the work. One of the things that's interesting to me about this study in Illinois that I think we can learn from in California is the fact that we have something in common, which is a lot of multilingual families.
Mhm.
Um, and we in here, but other states across the country have very large numbers of English learners, multilingual families. And I know that you've sort of teased out some of what we learned from immigrant families as you did this work, and curious if you would share some of that, those findings with us from the study.
Yeah. So we went to Bright Spot and partner schools in immigrant rich communities. So, like, we were able to compare the experiences of bright spots and partners that were both in high ELL schools. And what we found at first was a little surprising, really. Like, what we found is that the partner schools, when we analyzed the data, we found that partner schools talked more than the bright spot schools about translation and interpretation supports.
Hmm. Okay.
And at first that seemed like, well, that's interesting. You would expect the bright spot schools to talk about that more. But then when you unpack it, you're like, well, that's kind of basic, to be honest. Like, if you're going to work in an immigrant community, like, of course you need to like have materials translated and have interpretation services in a school. In fact, you're required to do that by Title I regulations. So what we saw is actually the bright spot schools basically said, like, yeah, of course we have interpreters, and of course we send materials home, but that's just where we start. We do a whole lot more to support our English learner families. And the one thing that really popped that I think is like a real opening is something we call student mediated interactions. That's basically things where the student is involved in the relationship between the parent and the teacher. This does not mean that students are taking on parenting roles. Like, it's not that the student is like interpreting for their parent. It means that there's some examples that we put in here. There's things like student-led conferences, students presenting to their families at like an evening event, like a demonstration of learning, like family showcases, like parents having to sign off on their kids doing work at home. It's sort of this idea, like, you know how a lot of schools will say to you, like, we really struggle to get parents to come to our back to school night or our literacy night, but you've got the like kindergarten winter showcase, and you're like, I didn't know we had this many parents, because they're all there. We're all there with our cameras up. We're taking pictures of our babies' videos, watching them sing their song. All right. There's a reason for that, right? Prior research shows what is very intuitive, people understand, is that student invitations are very motivating for parents to come to the school.
Mhm.
And so we found that these student mediated interactions, there was a big difference. Like, the bright spot schools just talked much more about these student mediated interactions than partner schools. But at the high ELL schools, it was an enormous difference. It was really magnified at the ELL community, in the high ELL communities. And my hypothesis on this is that because the norms around parents engaging in school are so different in other countries than they are here, that when students essentially are in the middle of the interaction or are the ones inviting their families, it's almost like a cultural on-ramp to the school for the families. It makes it much more accessible, because it's like, well, my kid is asking me to come, or I'm going to see my kid perform, or I'm going to see my kid do something special. I'm going to feel a reason to be proud of my child. We should be trying to, as much as we can at schools, to give parents reasons to feel proud of their children, and that will bring them into our schools much more effectively and creates a tremendous opening for that partnership that we're looking for.
Oh, beautiful. And it's taking the word partnership to another level, because it's not just the teacher and the parent, but it's now bringing the child. So it's a real in the with the full meaning of family, right? That child is part of, their own, both engagement with their teacher and the parent. But with the three of them together, I think that's obviously very powerful. I love it. I don't know that I've heard it. I mean, I've heard of the student-led conferences, et cetera, but your presentation brings it to another level in a beautiful way, because I hadn't thought about the reasons that families. I mean, I do know my parents would, if they could, get off work, come to a special event or whatnot. Um, but somehow, I think the bright spot schools do it in a way that isn't just about showcasing the kids, but involving the beauty of that family. Whether it's I don't know. I can imagine it could be a sporting event, it could be a performance, it could be something else, and having it as a cultural on ramp. I think is a beautiful way of framing it.
Thank you. Um,
Wow. I hope that there's lots of questions for us to, there's a lot that, you've offered, and I'm certain that people might have questions or want to engage. So I'm going to ask Ashley if she can tee up some questions for us from the participants. What do we got, Ashley?
Hi all. There was conversation happening in the chat as you guys were rolling and continuing, but I'll lift up one that came up, which was about linchpins for moving instruction into an effective tool for families. It's hard for schools to provide families with effective everyday tools. So I think this person is looking for some suggestions around what ways families can be actively engaged, and not just information on the schools.
So where might they get information about what their kids are learning that they could do at home to amplify that learning?
Yeah, I understood that to be like how do families like practice some intentionality and some like an active role if their school is not creating the structure for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there is no short-circuiting the parent-teacher relationship. So before we start to go off and try to like find all the other resources, I would at least want to make sure that the parent has reached out to the child's teacher and asked them a couple core questions like, how is my child performing in school? How do you know how my child is performing in school? Where are they supposed to be by the end of the year? Where are they now? How can I support at home? Like there's a whole series of like questions around how do I know how my child is doing? And if you don't feel like you're getting really good answers, then like that's where you like start to reach out to the principal. You start to reach out to organizations like Families in Schools or other organizations that are active in your community or in your neighborhood and try to and talk to your neighbors and talk to other people about like how do we support our kids? Because I really want to make sure that people are clear that like the teacher probably knows the most about the learning of the child. And whether they feel equipped to share the full breadth of what they know or not is another question, but I would at least start there. Yoli, you probably have ideas about how to answer this question too.
Uh, I do both from, my role at Families and Schools, but also having been a former school board member in LA. So, there are, I imagine, organizations in your community that work with that are available to you to work with you around the educational system, around what's happening in schools. Um, and often, like we do, we have, I'll speak to the example of early literacy because we've been very, very focused with our Read LA campaign in helping equip parents with the knowledge and information of what they need to know about how children learn to read. So, we do workshops for parents, we've done community learning sessions. We have very innovative tools that are easy to understand and digest, very visual around how the brain works, around the six pillars. So we produce all of that. And by the way, those are free. We can give them away to anyone here that you could share with your parents or your teachers to share with other parents. Um, and we also, more importantly, have a list of questions to ask. Again, this is specifically around early literacy, but you could extrapolate these questions to talk about math or talk about science. Questions that you ask the principal, questions that you ask the teacher, different questions if your child is an English learner, because we know that the pathway is a little bit different for EL kids. So, there are organizations, and we have some that we could provide you if you want. As a school board member, I would say, yes, talk to the teacher, talk to the principal, and talk to your school board member. That's why they are there. They are there to represent you and tell them my wish for my school is that they would have deeper family engagement because it will help not just my kid, but all kids do better in school. So, we try to help families know that they have that power, that agency to request that, to ask for that, to entertain that with their school board member. Um, And, if that school board member is not responsive, make sure you vote if you can vote. We've got to be much more engaged and involved in how our schools run. Many are doing a great job. Many just need that relationship starting from the family. Maybe that's the way to start, as EL has suggested. Um, and it is a two-way street. But our hope at Families and Schools is that we are providing some of that capacity building, equipping our educators and our teachers, building this knowledge base of what you've just shared, Ale, with the education community, so that it's not just resting on the parent, it's resting on the school, but sometimes it will rest on the parent, and that parent, we hope we can get activated in that way in asking some of these questions. So I hope that answers the question for the person that asked online. Ashley, is there any other question?
Um, just a follow up about the types of tools that teachers in schools should be offering, which I think you hit on in part. And then there was another question that was answered earlier that maybe y'all can elaborate more on, just to like close this or wrap us out if no other questions pop up. Specifically about like what it looks like for schools to be improving uh, principal interaction and then use of survey data, right? Like if schools are capturing family engagement survey data, how can they use that to improve attendance, for instance, at principal meetings or something like that?
Okay. I have a lot of opinions about parent survey data. Um,
Or you're a researcher?
uh, which I didn't expect to be. I have to say, I've sort of stumbled into this career. I do research and I do training, but I was a school. I ran a school district family engagement department, and then uh, trained a lot of school leaders on family engagement, and really loved the opportunity to do both research and training. Um, I do want to say to my friend Diana Mesa, who asked if this presentation could be available. I imagine at Families and Schools, you guys are going to send this out to anybody who registered. And I'm also available we're also happy to like share the findings of this study far and wide, because we want it to be heard and understood. On the question of parent survey data, um, there's two main problems with parent survey data that I see out there. The main one is that schools are not very good at capturing parent survey data. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You hear from a lot of parents like, what is this? I filled this out last year. I don't see nothing different. And so what you end up with is very low response rates from parent survey data, typically in schools. And even if it isn't a very low response rate, it's highly variable, like from year to year and like from school to school. You see a lot of variability in terms of response rates. But response rates aren't even the biggest problem, because you could have like a 30% response rate at a school and say, like, that would be fine if the sample was representative of the student body. So like the biggest problem isn't even the response rate, it's the representativeness of the sample, because we know who tends to complete those surveys more. If you had a true representation of your school's community responding, and we only had about 30%, but it was like roughly the same percentage of like Black students families and Latino families and English learner families and families of the mix of social, then you would say, okay, we have a representative sample, like we can actually make some inferences based on this data. But if you don't have a representative sample, like be really careful about making decisions or even making meaning of data if you haven't captured data like that is representative. But I have good news, because I'm working with the Brookings Institution to do an analysis of all the different tools and rubrics that are out there right now. And we're going to be publishing a piece, hopefully this year, sometime soon, that is essentially a roadmap for schools that want to know how to use quantitative measurement tools more effectively. And that is feeding into stage 3 of our study, which we actually haven't talked about, which
Oh, I didn't know
is,
it was stage 3.
yeah, there is, well, we're fundraising for it at the moment. Um,
Okay.
So stage three is meant to improve measurement. What we want to be able to do is have a simple tool that helps schools track the family engagement practices that they are doing so that they can actually improve over time, because what we measure, we pay more attention to. And we can't, it's hard to get better at something if we don't track and measure ourselves over time. And like tracking ourselves just based on how many parents show up to an event is not that great. And like, the LCAP requires schools to rate themselves in on a number of family engagement measures. And that's good, but it's very subjective. And they tend to rate themselves very highly. So, because there's no real incentive to be like truly open and honest there. So we need a tool, I think, that objectively captures all of the family engagement practices that are known to advance student learning. And that's what we want to create in stage three.
Amazing, amazing. Um, that could lead to the aspiration you had earlier. Like if California could just, have a similar way of measuring the impact of family engagement in the way that Illinois does. I don't know if that could be extrapolated at a statewide level. By the way, those of you who are not from California, LCAP is insider baseball, local control accountability plan. We won't get into it, but that's a California thing. But that was a very, very good point.
It's a district plan that every district has to submit,
That's
basically.
right, essentially. Okay, as we come to a close, I just got my 2-minute warning. It's probably now just a minute or a minute and a half. I want to make sure that we close out AL in a way that people hopefully have felt heard. But if there's anything else about what leaders and schools can do with these findings, what would you recommend? Because we are going to share the deck and you'll get the report as well. But what would you say for folks that are here with us about what they should do with these findings?
Uh, Read them and talk to your colleagues about them. Like just lift up dialogue on family engagement. And to my leaders in the room, like the advanced districts set time aside intentionally for families and teachers to build relationship and start to like at the beginning of the year, can you release a PD day or two, or even take it to the collective bargaining table to add a day into the teacher's contract so that they can have a whole day just for building relationships with families, do a home visits, do community walks, do positive phone calls home, do things that build a relationship very intentionally, and then provide training and support to teachers so that they feel equipped to share open and honest, transparent data about how their kids are doing in school. And then you'll start and provide time for teachers and staff to really unpack what they're learning from that experience so that you can start to build a much more comprehensive strategy based on the lived experiences of trying new things with families.
That's
That's what I
awesome.
do in my training. So that's my answer.
And I know Ashley and the training capacity building team will share some additional how to put this into practice thoughts when you get the materials from today. But I know we're getting close to time, so I want to say thank you to Dr. Bergman for being with us. Thank you, by the way, just also not just being with us, but for doing this study. It's meaningful and it's impactful and it provides a roadmap for the future of how family engagement might be reimagined, the name of our series. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to Learning Heroes and to the new teacher, TNTP, for being part of this work as well. Convey our thanks to them, our gratitude to them, and I'll turn over to Ashley to close this out.
Thank you, Yoli. Thank you, Eyal, for the wisdom, the practice, the reinforcement of things that we know, but things that we need to be reminded of in some capacity. And thank you all for joining our family engagement reimagining series. I think that this conversation is important, and we want to make sure that we're continuing this conversation into implementation and practice. And I know so much of the chat conversation, as well as the conversation that Yoli and Eyal had today, was anchored there. But we're not finished with this conversation. We really want you to join us next month, and I know that you all found us in some way in the digital world. We encourage you to stay in contact with us. If you scan the QR code, you can reach our training capacity building page on our website, and you can join us next month because we're going to be talking about the California Reading Screener and how schools can be building trust and intentionality with families and making sure that our kiddos are on track for our reading and how the screeners play into that. So we want to see you all next month around the same time, and please stay in contact with us. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Wishing everyone safety and wellness until we are next digitally convened, and stay engaged.